You spend your life explaining your choices, justifying your attitudes, trying to make others understand your motives. But here's a truth that will shake your certainties. Every explanation you give is a drop of power that slips through your fingers. And worse, people don't want your explanations to understand you better. They want your explanations to control you better. Because when you justify yourself, you automatically place yourself in an inferior position. You become the defendant defending yourself before a tribunal that never asked to judge your life. And the cruelest part is that the more you explain, the less you are understood. Because explanation was never about comprehension. It's about power. Carl Jung knew this when he said that individuation, the process of becoming who you really are, requires you to stop seeking external validation for your internal choices. But there's something even deeper in this observation. When you stop explaining yourself, you're not just preserving energy, you're forcing the world to deal with you as you really are, not as they want you to be. And that's terrifying for those who have always depended on your justifications to keep you under control. Think about it. How many times have you caught yourself elaborating long explanations about why you were late, why you chose a certain path, why you said no to something you didn't want to do? And how many times did those explanations actually change the other person's opinion? In reality, every word you waste trying to justify yourself is a confirmation that you believe you owe explanations about your own life. But the truly powerful person doesn't explain. They simply are. And here's the first shock. The people who most demand explanations from you are exactly those who least deserve to receive them. Because those who truly care about you accept your choices even without fully understanding the reasons. Those who truly love you trust your judgment. But those who want to control you, manipulate you, keep you small, those will always ask for explanations. Not because they care about your logic, but because they know that the moment you justify yourself, you hand over control of the narrative. Jung discovered something fascinating about the human psyche. We have a compulsive tendency to seek approval, even when that approval comes from people we don't respect, don't admire, and don't even like. It's as if there's an internal program running in the background, constantly checking if we're being accepted, if our actions are being approved, if our choices make sense to others. But this program isn't your friend, it's your executioner. Because every time you stop to explain a personal decision, you're implicitly agreeing that other people have the right to question your autonomy. You're saying that your choices need to pass through the sieve of others' approval before being valid. And this is a fundamental betrayal against your own sovereignty. You were born free, but you're living as if you needed authorization to exist the way you are. But here comes the part no one wants to admit. You explain yourself not to clarify, but to please. You justify yourself not to be understood, but to be accepted. And in this process, you become a performer of your own life, constantly adjusting your performance based on the audience's reaction. You stop living your truth and start living an edited, palatable, socially acceptable version of who you could be. And people notice this. They smell the insecurity masked as politeness. They detect the lack of conviction disguised as consideration. And the more you explain yourself, the more they lose respect for you. Not because your reasons are bad, but because the simple act of explaining communicates that you're not sure of your own choices. Jung called this the collective shadow, the part of us that gets lost when we try to be accepted by the group. Every unnecessary explanation is a piece of your individuality that you sacrifice on the altar of social approval. And the most tragic part is that this approval is temporary, conditional, fragile. But the integrity you lose in the process, that's permanent. Now imagine a person who simply doesn't explain themselves, who makes their choices and bears the consequences without needing anyone's validation, who says no without following it with a paragraph justifying why they can't say yes, who arrives, does what they need to do, and leaves without needing to narrate every step of the process. How do you feel in front of this person? Probably there's a mixture of irritation and admiration, isn't there? Irritation because they're not playing the explanation game everyone expects, and admiration because they have something you desire, the freedom to simply be. This person isn't being rude or arrogant, they're being sovereign. And sovereignty, Jung knew, is the natural state of the healthy psyche. When you are truly sovereign, you don't need to convince anyone of anything. Your presence is your statement. Your actions are your philosophy. Your choices are your signature. But let's be honest about the price of this freedom. When you stop explaining yourself, some people will be uncomfortable. They'll say you're being cold, distant, arrogant. They'll try to provoke you to return to the old pattern of justifying yourself, because your new posture exposes something uncomfortable: how much they depended on your explanations to feel in control of the interaction. And here's the deepest insight. People don't want your explanations to understand you better. They want your explanations to keep you in a position where they can judge, question, approve, or disapprove of your choices. Every explanation you give is an opportunity for them to exercise power over your life. And when you stop explaining yourself, that power simply disappears. Jung observed that the individuation process always involves a period of misunderstanding. People will say you've changed, that you're different, that you're no longer the same person, and they're right. You're no longer the person who bowed to the need for others' approval. You've become someone who lives according to your own values, not others' expectations. But here's what happens when you really stop explaining yourself. The world begins to adjust to you, instead of you adjusting to the world. People stop questioning your decisions because they realize you're not open to debate about your own life. They begin to respect your choices because you clearly respect them first. And most importantly, you stop attracting people who are only interested in you while they can exercise some control over your actions. Because there's a fundamental difference between being understood and being respected. Understanding is optional, respect is essential, and you'll never be truly respected while you're constantly explaining yourself. Respect is born from certainty, conviction, integrity. And integrity means doing what you believe is right, regardless of who approves or disapproves. Jung knew that true psychological maturity arrived when you finally stopped trying to be understood by everyone and began living according to your internal moral compass. When you stop explaining your choices, you're communicating something powerful: that your decisions don't need anyone's approval to be valid. And this changes everything. People begin to see you differently, not as someone who needs to be convinced, persuaded, or approved, but as someone who has already decided who they are and how they are going to live. This generates a different kind of respect, a deeper type of consideration. Because when you're not constantly explaining yourself, people realize you're not constantly doubting yourself. But perhaps the most liberating thing of all is this: when you stop explaining yourself, you can finally begin to live. Because all that energy you spent elaborating justifications, anticipating criticisms, preparing defenses, all that energy can now be directed toward what really matters: building the life you want to live. And here's the final irony. When you stop trying to be understood by everyone, you finally become comprehensible to the right people. When you stop explaining yourself to those who don't deserve your explanations, you create space for authentic connections with those who truly value your essence. Jung called this synchronicity. When you align with your inner truth, the universe conspires to bring the right people and situations into your life. But this only happens when you stop wasting energy trying to justify your existence to those who will never really appreciate it. So here's my challenge for you. During the next week, observe how many times you catch yourself explaining something that doesn't need to be explained. How many times you elaborate justifications for decisions that have already been made. How many times you seek approval for choices that are entirely yours, and then gradually begin to stop. Begin to trust that your actions speak for themselves. Begin to believe that your life doesn't need to pass through the sieve of others' approval to have value. Because when you finally stop explaining your life, something magical happens. You can finally begin to live it. And the world, however resistant it may seem at first, eventually adjusts to your new reality. Because in the end, the world always adjusts to those who know exactly who they are and don't need anyone's permission to be it. If you made it this far and this content made sense to you, leave a like on this video and write in the comments, "I stop explaining myself." Let's see how many people are really ready to reclaim their personal sovereignty. And subscribe to the channel, because the next video will reveal something even more powerful about the psychology of respect that you won't want to miss. Until then,